Thank you so much, Jeff. Well, welcome to all the individuals. Today we're talking about Canada, our neighbors to the north, and we're going to cover a mini timetable, which is very important when you're doing Canadian research, and any kind of research, really. We're going to talk about some of the differences in searching Canadian records against or versus U.S. records, some border crossings, and then we're going to talk about some of the census records, the different types. We're also going to talk about some church records, and there's different types of church records available. And the last, but not least, is some land records. They have very, very valuable, helpful information. And then, of course, we'll have a question and answers at the end. The first thing I want to talk about is Canada itself. As you do research in any kind of country, you need to understand how it developed. And so, actually, the first place that was settled was St. John's in Prince Edward Island, and then Quebec, then Newfoundland, New Brunswick, and then Ontario, Nova Scotia. And notice that we're still mostly on the East Coast. And then we slipped to the west with British Columbia, Alberta, and Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. And those areas were settled later on. And so when you're doing research and looking at census records, you have to understand when things happen to know where those records are located. And so we're going to do a little mini timeline to kind of give you some ideas. Here we have the Nova Scotia 1605, Quebec 1608, and then when England took over for Nova Scotia and Newfoundlands after the 7 Years' War, it was 1713. Then Halifax in 1749. So that now when you think about that where are the records for these time periods? And then 1755 to 58, the Acadians were forced out of Nova Scotia. And then Prince Edward Island was detached from the Nova Scotia area. Also New Brunswick. And then, of course, Quebec was divided into your lower and your upper. In fact, my own grandfather comes from Ottawa, Canada. Slipping into the 1800s and 1900s, we have Manitoba that was settled by the displaced Highlanders. If you remember, the Scottish Highlanders were kicked out of their lands, and this is one of the areas that a lot of the Highlanders settled. And then in 1867, the Dominion of Canada was created, which united all of these places together under one place, one domain. And so we have that in 1867. Of course, at this point in time, there had already been a major census that was taken in 1851 and 1861. So those places are going to be done in separate areas. 1871, we have the British Columbia. 1873, we have Prince Edward Island. And then in 1898, we have the Yukon Territory. Saskatchewan, Alberta only came along in 1905, and then Canadian citizenship established separately from the British in 1947. The 10th province was Newfoundland as late as 1949. Understanding those concepts will make your actual research a lot easier. Now, a lot of people confuse Canada with the United States as far as they think, well, you know, they're right there. They are our neighbors to the north, and many of the individuals immigrated from Canada to the United States during the 1800s and in the 1900s. They left the U.S. and immigrated to the U.S. also during the Revolution. Some actually went back to Canada between these times. The travel between happened quite frequently. The area was settled similar to the United States, with the East being settled before the West. Some of the records that are similar would be your vital records, your probate and census records, your land records, and your church records. But the differences are very valuable to understand. Each province determines what types of records to have and how to keep them, something similar to some of the states in the United States. Most records are definitely not indexed by surname, and one needs to really have an idea of the province or the town, and sometimes you have to hunt page by page when there are no indexes. However, As always, challenges are not impossible to overcome with a little bit of perseverance. We often have, as we serve people at a reference counter, we say you have to be patient and optimistic. Many of the records are coming online, FamilySearch.org, Ancestry.ca or Ancestry.com if you have the international subscription, Archive.org, and there are also government sites that are part of Canada. And then there's also some social media resources, third-party applications, and lots of new scan media as books and CDs are scanned and made available online. Those are also helpful to you. I do want you to remember that the border between Canada and the U.S. at this time period was pretty thin. Your ancestors settled in the if they settled in the U.S., you search the U.S. first, and then consider Canadian border crossings and census records and naturalization records. Now, the border crossings are from St. Albans, Vermont, is where they would come on down, and it would be from about 1895 to 1954. So you're thinking probably, well, what about happened before 1895? Well, sometimes they weren't recorded and sometimes they were. The image I'm showing you here is the list of the manifest. They treated it like a ship, even though they were crossing over. And this is one of my ancestors here, Laurent Plant, and his second wife, Cordelia. And I think I've put that on a separate list here. They arrived March 11th, 1923, and I pulled the most important information from the actual record. And just one of the many types of border crossings. Some are individual slips and some are lists like this. Ancestry does have the Canada border crossings, and they also have the set of record collections done by William Philby called Passenger and Immigration Ship List. And what Mr. Philby did was he started to extract the immigration information from many different types of documents, wherever he could find them. A total of 18 volumes that were done before he passed away. And many of these volumes are still available in different large libraries, but there was also a CD version, and of course now it's available here on Ancestry. And this, when you actually, sorry, let me go back to the previous slide. When you actually research this and put a name in here, you really get the actual location of where the information came from so that you can follow it backwards. To locate the records in the Family History Library catalog, note that I have the previous version listed, and I need to state this up front. The FamilySearch.org website is undergoing multiple changes. They're doing a lot of different resources, putting them online, and so the actual catalog has not been updated with some of the tools that are helpful for researching. The data is there, but some of the surrounding data is not. And so for the moment, we recommend that you use the previous version. So the listing here that I've given you is from the previous version. And notice it says Canada, Emigration, and Immigration, and that's how you find the list of available resources at the Family History Library catalog level. And then also you can do a search for Canadian immigration records, and you'll get a variety of different other areas. For instance, here's the ships list, Collections Canada, and of course it brings in part of Ancestry. And so you can look in other locations besides the Family History Library and Ancestry. There are other places that you can look for Canadian records. Slipping into census records is a very interesting thing. The very first census was taken in 1666, and this area covered was the French settlement of Montreal, Quebec City, and Trois-Rivières. And it collected the information about the landowners and the individuals, where they were living, and the head of household. And the reason that they did this was to find out what they had on their residences, whether they had any ammunition, livestock. They wanted to take sort of a survey of the things that they owned in case they needed it militarily. John Talon was the one that was behind it, and he actually collected the data personally. He visited 3,215 colonial homes, collected their particulars on vital statistics, and recorded all of the resources they helped as they were just a small little colony and trying to pull together as a small colony to make sure they had enough to get through that year and move on and help one another with combining the resources of individuals. And this census is available from a variety of places online. I've put all census records. They have it available here online. And also, this is actually a sample for Montreal, and it gives you what they actually collected. And so in this sample, you see Louis Otis, and it gives you the name of all the members of his family. Marie's a daughter. She's 6 months old. And you go through, and this is what is on that census, whether they were a laborer, a domestic, engaged in domestic work. And so as you read through this, you do need to know a little bit about the actual French language. But you get enough information to put your families together, which is the real reason for doing this. You get their ages, and so you know this was taken in 1666, so you know that this person was born around 1626. And so from this, you can it actually helps you through multiple things as you're filling out a family group record. You are able to keep your families together. Another place that you might want to find it is Hugh Armstrong's genealogy site. He has it also available, and he says that the census is presented as the names were listed in the 10 particular regions. He's actually put down the different places just like the previous site, but as you were to do this particular 1666, you could do a search on any search engine and find multiple copies of this particular census. In addition to that particular census, there were colonial and regional censuses done before the 1871 when the first official national census. Remember, it was 1860s when they became the Dominion of Canada, and so the first official as the Dominion of Canada wasn't until 1871. All told, there are about 98 colonial and regional censuses conducted. Most were done between 1710 to 1760. And these are the resources that they wanted to know in case they had to go to military battle. They wanted to know the number of men in the manpower, what the stock was there food available, supplies, whether they had muskets and swords, and what other kind of items that they were on individual properties. And they did this strictly mostly for trying to keep the individual areas growing and going forward and being able to protect themselves in case of battle. Here's a sample of a 1681 census done in Berthier. Notice the entry for the head of or the ruler of Berthier in 1681. We have Alexander Berthier, and then his two children, Alexandra and Catherine, and a domestic person to help them, Jacques Chavot. And it tells you the number of guns, fusees, the number of animals, and the amount of land that they were on at the time. And again, this one is from all census records. And as you go and look for these different census records, you'll note that some of them have been transcribed and put online. Now your provincial censuses, these covers the Acadian area. Here's a sample of it. This was actually taken from a book, and it's done in 1700. And it lists the inhabitants of Port Royal, their families, the livestock, the lands, and the firearms. Again, keeping in mind the reason for the census records being taken was an assessment of supplies on hand, and also to see if their area was growing, if children were being born and new people were coming in and families were expanding, and this gave them that information so they knew